Hello, 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 everybody. So I believe I am live. Okay, so now I believe I'm live. Okay, I'm just gonna start tagging people in hopes that I can bring some people in, because as usual, my little anxiety levels are already through the roof. So just wanna say what needs to be said and be gone. So I'm just gonna tag a few people. So if you hear me typing, that's just me tagging people. But hopefully everybody's having a good day today. And I'm just gonna keep tagging. I'm just gonna tag a few more people. Okay, it says that there are 3 people on. So just let me know if y'all can hear me. Joe just commented, I see him. What's up, Joe? How you doing? And I think I tagged. Okay, now it says that we have 4 people. I just need somebody to let me know if you can hear me. So let me know if you can hear me, and then as soon as I hear that, we can just start. Hey, Alicia, how you doing? Oh, can you hear me, Alicia? As soon as I hear that the audio is working, we will start. And I know that there's a delay too. So okay, so Alicia said she can hear. All right, so there's probably she probably been wrote that, but there's like a little delay with Facebook Live. But anyway, hopefully this Wi-Fi will just continue to work as it worked last time. So let's hope that it continues to do that. But without further ado, we just gonna get into the topic. So I announced the topic around like 6 o'clock, but the topic is God's sovereignty, chess, not checkers. So when we hear the phrase like chess, not checkers, we usually use it in a sense where we are talking about 2 different players who are kind of playing at 2 different levels. So we got one player who's on the checkers level, and they're kind of more elementary, they're kind of more rudimentary, they're kind of like just learning the game, so to speak. So their moves are not as precise, or their moves are not as sophisticated in many senses as a player who is playing chess. So a chess player, in this analogy, is a person who's more sophisticated, somebody who's on a more mature level, on a higher level, etc., etc. So that reflects perfectly in conjunction with our relationship with God. So we are on the chess player level, and God is on the, or we're not on the chess player level. He's on the chess player level, we on the checker player level. So we playing checkers, he playing chess. All right, so that was where that analogy came from. All right, so anyway, we're going to talk about God's sovereignty. Got my little notes as usual. I got my Bible as usual, the same one I've been using, the Keyword Bible, and I got my little notes. So I just want to give a little rundown and a little outline of what we're going to talk about before we actually get into it, and then we'll just dive directly in. All right, so first and foremost, I'm going to tell you about a personal illustration that God gave me about God's sovereignty, and then I'm going to go into an official definition of what God's sovereignty is. And then I want to go into 2 Old Testament examples of God's sovereignty, which for this case we'll be using Joseph and Jonah. And then I wanted to use 2 New Testament examples, which will be Jesus and then us. Because I always want to tie everything back to Jesus, obviously, because he's the whole purpose for Christians. And then I want to tie it back to us because we are the believers, or those who are not believers yet, but they want to be. So all right, so that's the outline. That's how we're going to do it. So I want to start off first with the personal illustration that God gave me. So this is a subject that God has kind of been speaking to me about for like a couple of years now, probably like more like several years than a couple. But he's been speaking to me about sovereignty for a little while, basically. And the way that he first started speaking to me about it was I had this dream one night. So I had this dream, and this was a few years ago. I was still living in North Carolina, I believe, when I had the dream. So I had this dream, and in the dream, I was driving on a highway. So I was on like an 8-lane highway, and there was 4 lanes on one side, 4 lanes on the other side, and like one of those medians in the middle that you could actually cross over on. So it wasn't one of the ones with like the guardrail, it was just one where you could like actually cross over. So I was on the furthermost right lane in this dream, the exit lane, basically. So I was on the little slow lane, on the little exit lane, minding my own business, driving down the highway, trying to get off on my exit. So all of a sudden, while I'm driving, minding my own business, doing my own thing, the car starts to shift over into the next lane. So I'm like, okay, no, stop, because I'm trying to get off my exit soon. So I'm turning the wheel, trying to like get the car to go back to the lane that I was originally in, but it just keeps going in the opposite direction. So like I'm turning the wheel again. I'm like, okay, car, why are you not working? So the wheel's just not working. It just keeps on going. So it shifts over to the next lane, and the next lane, then the next lane. Then before you know it, I'm right next to the oncoming traffic lane. I'm right next to the median, about to cross over into oncoming traffic. So at this point, I'm starting to panic. And I'm like, no matter how hard I turn this wheel the other way, it's still going the opposite way. Like, why are you doing this to me right now? So then I cross over the median and I get into the oncoming traffic lane. And at this point in the dream, I'm crying and praying by now. I'm like, Lord, I'm about to die. I'm about to get hit. It's about to be over for me. I'm like crying and praying, like, I'm gonna get hit, I'm gonna get hit, I'm gonna die. And then like God is not saying anything back to me. So I'm like, am I like abandoned now? Like, is this my doom? Whatever. So I'm sitting there crying and stuff. And then and praying and stuff. And then it just keeps shifting over more and more lanes. And like while I'm shifting over these lanes, the cars are coming toward me like top speed, how people do on the highway, but they're not hitting me. So I'm like a little frazzled because I'm not getting hit, but I feel like I'm gonna get hit because I'm in the oncoming traffic lane. So I keep traveling over. My wheel is turned the complete opposite direction, but my car is still going the other way. And then all of a sudden, once I get to the furthermost lane on the other side, the car turns around and I get off the exit over there. And then I go home. So I woke up from this dream puzzled and confused. And I was like, now, Lord, I know that was a spiritual dream, but I don't know what you was trying to tell me through that. Like, I don't understand. Like, why was my car going the complete opposite direction? Does that mean, like, you're about to, like, do something crazy to me or what? And then his interpretation to me was pretty simple. He just said, the dream means that God is sovereign. And I was like, okay. God is sovereign. And I was like, then I started like getting a little bit afraid because I was like, okay, so God is sovereign, yeah, he's in control. So what does that mean? What does that mean for me, basically? Because I'm the one in the dream and I was one in the car. So what does that mean? And he's saying basically, sometimes in our lives or in my life or whatever, you might be trying to do one thing or you might be trying to go in one direction, but God has a different plan and different direction that he wants you to go in, and you're going to end up going in it. Basically, because he's sovereign. So but another thing he showed me in that was like in all my panicking and all my praying and stuff, and I'm like, I'm about to get hit, I'm about to die, etc., etc., like feeling like my doom is imminent. He was like, you can be secure in my sovereignty. He was saying that, you notice none of the cars hit you, none of the cars even touched you, none of them even came near you. So you were safe in my sovereignty. You were secure in my sovereignty, so you can rest in my sovereignty. So he showed me through that dream that not only is God sovereign, meaning that he's in control, but his sovereignty is something that we can be secure in. So that was my illustration that he gave to me to show me what sovereignty meant. But for a more official definition, I went to the Logos software, which I recently purchased this to help as a study tool for learning different stuff about the Bible, etc., etc. It's one of the hosts of this software is Damon Richardson. So he's like an extraordinary Bible teacher. Like a lot of people might be following him now, but if you're not following him, you should follow him. Damon Richardson, and he's on Facebook as well as YouTube. He has a ministry called Urban Logia. So if you go on YouTube, it's Urban Logia, Urban Urban, and then Logia Logia, and then on Facebook it's just Damon Richardson. And he is a representative, or one of the representatives for Logos software, which is like a Bible study tool software. But anyway, so I looked up on this software to get a good definition of what God's sovereignty is. And the definition that I found was that God's sovereignty refers to his absolute and unrivaled rule over all his creations and their circumstances. So all his creatures, all his creations, and their circumstances. So basically what that means is that he supersedes all. So God is overall. There's nobody that is matching him. There's nobody that's even anywhere near him. He is above all. His sovereignty is above all. He's in total control. But as he showed me in the dream, you can be secure in that because he has your best interests at heart. Like, you might be afraid in your individual circumstance because you don't know what's going on, but God always knows what's going on. So you can be secure in that. All right, so anyway, that was the definition. Now I want to go into the Old Testament examples of God's sovereignty and how that played out in certain individuals' lives. And then after that, we'll go into the New Testament. So as I said before, the Old Testament examples were going to be Jonah and Joseph. So we'll start with Joseph first because he's first in the order of things. He's found in the book of Genesis. So if you look in the book of Genesis, you can find the whole story of Joseph. It spans several chapters. So from Genesis chapter 37 to Genesis chapter 50 is where you will find Joseph's story. So he has quite the story, and it's one of the most beautiful stories I've ever read. Like they even have like a movie about Joseph, I believe. I think I watched it too, but yeah, it was dope. But his whole story is like beautiful. It'll bring you to tears and everything. Like, his story is lit. But anyway, we're going to be talking about like a small part of his story, or a small aspect of his story, as it relates to God's sovereignty, and how God's sovereignty, his will, his plan, his purpose, how all that works together and it comes true no matter what, basically. So we probably have all heard his story, but let's travel over to Genesis 37. And I have my little markers here in my Bible, so I'll find it easily. But we're going to start with 37 and verses 5 through 8. And just to like bring everybody up to speed for those who may either need to be refamiliarized with the story or have never heard the story before. So long story short, there was a man named Jacob. He had 12 sons and I think just one daughter. So he had like 13 kids. He had 4 baby mamas, but that's another story. So he had 12 sons. One of those sons was Joseph, and Joseph was a favored son. He was his favorite kid, basically. So if you ever hear like nowadays where there's sibling rivalry, and they say, "Oh, you're mom's favorite, you're dad's favorite," yeah, favoritism was real back in the scriptures. So Jacob favored Joseph over all the rest of his siblings. What made it kind of really bad was that not only did he favor him, he actually showed it very clearly in his life, and not only that, Joseph wasn't even the firstborn. Joseph was like the lastborn at that time. So he was like the youngest kid being favored over all the rest of the kids. So like he was like the baby of the family at this time, but he was being favored over all his older brothers and everybody. So naturally they hated him. But we're going to go into one of the reasons why they hated him. They hated him for many reasons, but here's one of the reasons why. So in Genesis 37 verses 5 through 8, we'll see that Joseph was a person who had dreams, ironically. Like how I had my dream and God gave me an interpretation. Joseph had a couple dreams. So his first dream, you can see in verse 5, it says, "Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, 'Please listen to this dream which I had. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf.' Then his brothers said to him, 'Are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you going to rule over us?' So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words." So not only did they hate his dream that he had, because it was pretty clear what the dream meant, they hated his interpretation of the dream too, because that only confirmed what it meant. So Joseph, he had quite the checkered history with his brothers. They did not like him at all. And then now they found that it was going to be even worse, because back in those days, they knew that when you had a dream, it actually had a meaning, and they knew that that meaning came from God. So they knew that basically this was going to come true one day. So not only was this guy being favored by their father, they didn't get no favor from the father. He was getting the favor. They was out working in the fields. He had to go and tell them. He had to go from the father's house to the field to tell them the dream in the first place. Like they was out there sweating. And he just came out there telling them this dream. "Oh yeah, by the way, and I'm going to rule over you one day." And then they're like, "What?" Like, no, definitely not. So they hated him. But then on top of that, if they didn't hate him enough then, this took him over the top. So then in verse 8, it picks up and Joseph had another dream. So in verse 8, it says, "Are you actually going to reign over us?" They hated him more. So then in verse 9, it says, "Now he still had another dream and related it to his brothers and said, 'Lo, I had another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me.' and he related it to his father and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So basically, Jacob kind of interpreted that dream. And what this one means is not only were all his brothers going to bow down to him one day, his father and mother, which symbolized like the sun and the moon, they were going to bow down to him too. So like everybody's bowing to Joseph for some reason. Like, okay, you don't got family favoritism, and that was bad enough. But now you got like godly favoritism. Okay, we got to get rid of this guy. So then his brothers kind of develop a little bit of a plan to get rid of him. They plan to do exactly that. They actually plan to kill him. But they settled for selling him into slavery, as you have probably already heard in the story if you read this before. So Joseph goes back, which he naturally was doing anyway. He was going back and forth between the father telling him everything that his brothers were doing, and then going back to the brothers to check on them, going back to the father, etc., etc. So on one of these other times that the father sends him back to them, they already have their plan in place. So what they do is they take Joseph, they throw him in a pit, and then they were planning on killing him, but then they end up finding some people who wanted a slave, so they sold him into slavery instead. So, and then told his father he died. So that was kind of cold-hearted, that was kind of evil, but hey, I guess that's how it got back then. So Joseph was banished essentially from his family. He was sold into slavery. And if you read the rest of the story, you'll see that he faced even more jealousy from other people. He was thrown in prison a couple times. He spent years and years. He basically went through a whole bunch of different experiences in his life that humbled him and filled him with wisdom and filled him with a godly heart, basically. So he basically had to have those experiences happen in his life to teach him a few lessons. So fast forward, if you go to Genesis 42, and you go to verses 1 through 6, you'll see how the story ends with Joseph and his brothers. So it says, "Now Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, 'Why are you staring at one another?' And he said, 'Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place, so that we may live and not die.' Then 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, 'I'm afraid that harm may befall him.' So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming, for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the ruler over the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came to him and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground." So we're going to stop there, but I basically wanted to read that part to show that everything that was in his dream basically ended up coming exactly true the way that he dreamed it. So just like how he dreamed that his brothers were one day going to bow down to him, they ended up literally actually doing that when their land had a famine years and years later. So years and years later, they didn't have no food, they didn't have nothing. They were either going to die or have to go somewhere to get food. So the place that they ended up going happened to be the place that Joseph was now ruler over underneath the Pharaoh, which was the ruler over the entire Egypt. Joseph was second in command to him, and he was over all the food. So his brothers came and bowed down to him, literally. Now, that just shows, that story in and of itself shows that God's plan is sovereign. So no matter what his brothers tried to do, whether they tried to kill him, sell him in slavery, etc., they still ended up doing exactly what he said they were going to do at the end of the day. However, one thing that is very important about this story is that them bowing down to him did not happen in the way that either he or they thought that it would. Like, they thought it meant that he was just going to be this cocky dude that they was going to bow down to, and now they got to serve Joseph for the rest of their life. And he probably thought the same thing because he was already getting favor from his father. He probably had, in his mind, he probably was a little bit cocky at that time, which is why he kept telling about all his dreams, snitching on him to his father, all that. But through his life experiences and through their life experiences, they both learned some very tough lessons. And at the end of the day, they did bow down to him, but not in the way that they thought or not in the way that he thought. And the reason why God had him do that was not because he wanted to make the brothers jealous, make them hate another brother, but the reason why he did that was because he had a plan in mind, because he knew before any of this even happened, that there was going to be a famine in that land. And he knew that these people were going to need food, and he knew that they weren't going to have it where they were. So he developed a plan to have them be protected regardless of all that, because God had a plan not just for Joseph, but he had a plan for his brothers, he had a plan for his father, and he had a plan for the entire tribes of Israel that would later come from them later on. So basically, it was like a mind-blowing kind of thing. So God had a plan from the very beginning, and his plan for Joseph's life followed into his plan for the entire nation of Israel as a whole. So because of Joseph being thrown into slavery, because of his brothers ended up having to bow down to him, having to come to Egypt to get the food, eventually the whole family ended up moving to Egypt. All Israel, all of Jacob's sons, all of his wives, all of Joseph's family ended up moving to Israel because the famine got so bad. But as a result of it, they ended up being protected. And they ended up having everything that they needed, which would allow them to thrive and grow and survive as a nation. And they continued to multiply and grow from there. So that just showed how God's purpose supersedes, and how you can be secure in God's purpose. We might think it's going to turn out one way, but it's going to turn out a whole nother way, and it's going to be for the good. So it's not forever for evil with God. It's always for good. So the next one is Jonah. So most of us have probably heard the story of Jonah too. And his story goes a little bit differently from Joseph. So Jonah's story is found in the book of Jonah, obviously. So I'm going to go there. I have my little notes here. And I'm going to briefly summarize. So basically what happened in the book of Jonah, in the first chapter, Jonah's a prophet. So God is telling Jonah that he wants him to go preach to these people called the Ninevites. He wants them to go to their land. He wants them to preach to them. He wants to prophesy to them and tell them that he's about to destroy them because they've been sinning and their sins are crazy. So he basically tells them, you go over there, you preach to these people, you tell them I'm about to destroy them. Jonah says no. So Jonah goes the opposite direction. He actually gets on a ship and travels in the exact opposite direction because he does not want to preach to these people. Because in the back of his mind, he knows that if he does preach to them, that they're going to repent and then God's going to save them. Which is kind of twisted, because why wouldn't you want people to be saved? But anyway, so Jonah goes in the opposite direction. And then by the end of the first chapter, they have this crazy storm, because since he was being disobedient to God's will, he was being disobedient what God told him to do, they end up having this crazy storm while they're on the ship. So they're in the middle of a large body of water on a ship, and there's a storm. So they're basically feeling like they're about to die. Jonah's asleep during all this. I don't know how he's asleep, but he's asleep during all this. So the people have to wake him up, and they're like, hey, we're about to die. We need you to do something. So then he's like, yeah, it's kind of because of me. This storm is kind of my fault. So they're like, it's your fault. Okay, so whatever you did, I'm going to need you to turn it back around, because we're not trying to die. So he's like, yeah, just throw me overboard. They're like, throw you overboard? What? I mean, if whoever did this to you is causing the storm, what makes you think that we are about to put our hands in it by throwing you overboard? And he's like, no, just trust me. Just throw me overboard. So they're like, all right, whatever God, Jonah be you serving, we ain't got nothing to do with this. We throwing him overboard. So they throw him overboard. The storm ceases, but Jonah is thrown into a fish. So Jonah's in the fish. The people are cool now because the storm has stopped. So they're like praising God, like, thank God, please, thank you for not killing us, etc., etc. So they're happy, they're worshiping God, they're praising God. He done turned their hearts too. So he's in the fish, and he's like, yeah, it kind of really messed up now. So he's like praying to God. He's like, God, please save me. Please just get me out of this fish. I'll do whatever. I'll do whatever you want me to do. So God's like, okay, you gonna do what I told you to do? All right, I'll let you out. So he let him out of the fish, and he ended up right on the land that God told him to originally go in the beginning, and he went the opposite direction. But he ended up right on the land that God told him to go to, the land of Nineveh. So Jonah begins his little journey. He finds the people of Nineveh. He preaches the message, they repent, and then God forgives them, and then he decides not to destroy them like he originally said he was going to. And Jonah gets mad, God rebukes him, and that's the end of that story. But the point of this story is to show that God's sovereignty superseded even in that situation. So even though God had told Jonah what he wanted him to do, and Jonah went the exact opposite direction, God's purpose and God's plan still got fulfilled, because he ended up exactly where God told him to be from the very beginning. So that says that even if you don't want it to happen, it's still going to happen. So That's the Old Testament examples. Now we're going to travel over to the New Testament, and we all have probably heard the story of Jesus and his crucifixion. But we're going to tell it yet again, and then we're going to talk about how Jesus' crucifixion actually ties into, in one single act of his crucifixion, how it pretty much fulfilled every single plan that he had for this entire world in just that one act, and all people in the world too, in that one act. So, if we go to John chapter 12, now Jesus is found obviously throughout the entire New Testament. He's even alluded to in the Old Testament as well, but we're just going to zero in on these scriptures to bring home the point. So, if you go to John chapter 12, you'll see that they're having the Jewish Passover. So they're having the Jewish Passover. It's a celebration that they had, which represented their freedom from Egyptian slavery, essentially. So God had delivered them from slavery way back in the day. If you heard the story of Moses, the Ten Commandments, Pharaoh, all the plagues, etc., etc. So this was a celebration of them being freed from all of that. They had this same Passover celebration on a regular basis. So this was in the middle of one of those celebrations. And while they're having this celebration, now for Jesus' entire time that he was on this earth, while he was doing his ministry, he had people that hated him. Despite the fact that he was healing people, he was like raising people from the dead, he was like performing miracles, he was turning water into wine, he was feeding 5,000 people with just 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. He was doing nothing but good. Like literally all he did was good. But he still had people that hated him. Like literally, he was the culmination of good. He was like, if you looked up good in the dictionary, Jesus' face is right there. So, but despite the fact that no matter what he did was good, they hated him. So there were people who hated him. They wanted him gone. And the reason why a lot of them wanted him gone was because he was taking their clout. Like, hey, this Jesus guy is stealing all the shine. This Jesus guy is coming in here taking our followers. Like, and then if you look in John chapter 12, verse 19, you'll see that some people actually explicitly say this. So it says in John 12 and 19, the Pharisees therefore said to one another, you see that you are not doing any good. Look, the whole world is gone after him. So basically that just shows how the mentality of some of the people were during that time. So the leaders hated him. They were mad because he was stealing their clout. He was stealing all the people, doing all this good. Like, hey, you're stealing all of our shine, basically. And they didn't realize who he was. They didn't realize like he was literally God in the flesh. He was literally the Messiah that they had been preaching about this entire time. Like he was literally their whole purpose. But they didn't realize that because their eyes were clouded by their pride and by the fact that they wanted to be in his place, essentially. So, in verse 20, it says that there were certain Greeks among those who were going up to worship at the feast. And these therefore came to Philip, who was of Bethsaida of Galilee, and they began to speak to him, saying, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Then Philip told Andrew, and Philip came and they told Jesus. So basically what happened was people from other parts of the world, people who were not part of the Jewish nation, they started to hear about Jesus, and they were like, hey, who is this guy? Like, he's healing people? Like, people are really raising from the dead? Like, there's miracles really happening? Like, we want to meet him. So they came and they wanted to meet outsiders, basically wanted to meet Jesus. So it says in verse 23, after Philip and Andrew told Jesus that the Greeks were coming to him, it says that he said, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains by itself alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. He who loves his life loses it, and he who hates his life in the world shall keep it to life eternal. If anyone serves me, let him follow me, and where I am, there shall my servant also be. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. And then in verse 27, it says, Now my soul has become troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this purpose I have came for this hour. Father, glorify thy name. And therefore there came a voice out of heaven and said, I have both glorified it and I will glorify it again. So then everybody was all like out of whack once this happened, because they didn't understand what this conversation meant. They didn't understand what it was that Jesus was saying. Like, all we did was say that these Greek people came to talk to you. Like, why are you saying all this stuff? But they didn't understand. Like, they understood that there was something special about him, but they didn't understand that he was God in the flesh. They didn't understand that those people coming to see him was literally a fulfillment of a promise that was made thousands of years prior. Like, they didn't realize that this was literally the culmination of God's purpose for all mankind being fulfilled right there before their very eyes. Because if you travel back to the beginning, when God set apart the people of Israel, when he spoke to Moses, he gave the 10 Commandments, etc., etc. When he set these people apart, when he gave a promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and then he repeated that promise to all the forefathers, what he did originally with the Israelites was he wanted to set them apart as a people, set them apart as a nation, to give them favor. And the reason why he wanted to give them favor was not because he wanted them just to have favor, but because he wanted the rest of the world to be jealous of this nation that had favor, and therefore want the favor that they had so that they could get it too. So what Jesus did in this situation was he came as a Jew. He came as part of the Israelites. He came as one of these people. He came preaching among them. He came living among them. He came performing miracles among them. He gave them the favor that they had from the beginning. And what happened was he made through all his actions, he started making all the people of the other nations jealous, so to speak. So they started coming. It says that the Greeks came and they said, oh, who's this Jesus guy? Can we see this Jesus guy? People from all over the world were coming. Can we see this Jesus guy? Who's this Jesus guy? So basically, with this one act that he did with his crucifixion and with his death and his burial and his resurrection, with this one act, what he did was he fulfilled all those promises. He made those nations jealous. He made them come. He made them want what the Israelites had, and then he gave it to them. So, because remember, if you look at the verses, it says that if the seed just stays where it is by itself. But if it falls in the ground and it dies, that's when it could bring forth the harvest. That's when it could bring forth that fruit. So Jesus had to die. He had to be crucified. He had to suffer. He had to go through the agony and all this other stuff that he didn't deserve, stuff that he didn't do anything to deserve. But he had to go through it in order to reap that harvest, in order for us to be redeemed, in order for the Jews' purpose to be fulfilled, or the Israelites' purpose to be fulfilled, in order for the outsiders, which is us, so to speak, in order for our purpose to be fulfilled, in order for the entire mankind to be redeemed. He had to go through those things. So basically, in one move, and this is why I said in the beginning that it's chess, not checkers, in that one move, he basically fulfilled all the promises and all the purposes and all the wills for all mankind in one move. That's how sovereign God is, and that's how his sovereignty works, and that's how it is in conjunction with his will, his purpose, and his plan. And that's how it also proves that no matter what anybody else has in mind, when God has something set in motion, it's going to come to pass. So they thought, the Pharisees and all them, they're like, we got to get rid of this guy because he's stealing our clout. He's stealing our followers. They thought that by crucifying him, they were getting rid of him. But they didn't realize that all they were doing was helping to fulfill God's plan. So by them crucifying him, they were helping to fulfill what God had planned from the way beginning. How do we know that that's true? If you travel over into 1 Peter, you'll see that 1 Peter, first chapter, and it's verse 20. It says, for he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has appeared here in the last times for the sake of you. So basically what he's saying is that before this earth even came forth, when we were just a figment of God's imagination, before he called forth the earth, before he spoke that word and said, let there be light, before any of this stuff, he had already knew the end from the beginning. He already knew everything that we were going to do, everything we were going to say, everything that we were going to think, and he already had a plan for it. And his plan, his power, his purpose, his sovereignty, it superseded everything that was going to come after that. So now everything, the entire history of mankind was culminated in this one move that he did. So it says before the foundation of the world, he already had this plan in place for our sake, because he loved us so much that he knew that we were going to be corrupted. So therefore he wanted to redeem us, and he already had a plan in place to redeem us, and he knew that we would never be able to redeem ourselves. So he knew that he would be the only one who would be able to redeem us, which is why he came on earth himself. And that's why he lived that perfect life. He performed the miracles, made the other people jealous, had them come in asking who he was. Then he died, allowed himself to be crucified, resurrected himself, and then now he's opened his arms. And he's like, I done fulfilled my purpose. I done fulfilled my plan. My sovereignty superseded it all. I knew the end from the beginning. I already had this planned out from the beginning. All you got to do is come. So that's not only shows us what God's sovereignty actually is, but it also shows us why we can be secure in his sovereignty, because all of that he did was for our sake. It wasn't for his sake, because he's already God. He's already perfect. He's already got everything in place that he needs. We're the ones who are in need. So he did all of that just for us. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it made sense to some people. Hopefully it explained or highlighted some things for some people. And hopefully somebody got something out of it. I was blown away personally by the part about Jesus, where how that one thing that he did literally fulfilled all promises he ever made for all mankind. Like, that part just killed me. I was just like, whoa. I mean, I knew the crucifixion was for our salvation and stuff, but I didn't realize that with that one move, he literally fulfilled all the promises he ever made, which is crazy. Like, my mind was blown at that. But anyway, does anybody have any questions? Like, that was the end of it. Anybody have any questions? I'm going to look back over the comments, and hopefully this thing does not start skipping on me. I know that there's like a little delay with Facebook Live. So if anybody has any questions, I see that my mother's on. I think she's still on. Hi, Ma. How you doing? It looks like Ren is on. Ren says God was showing Joseph that he was going to put him in a leadership position. Yeah, he definitely, with both dreams that he was having, he was showing him that he was going to be in that leadership position. He was going to be over all Egypt. But Joseph didn't know that at the time. He just probably, in his 17-year-old mind, he probably thought he was about to be some type of celebrity, so to speak. And all his brothers were just going to bow down and kiss his feet. Like, so he probably had a little bit of egocentrism, or was probably egotistical, should I say, with his mindset, because he was only 17 when he had these dreams. So you can only imagine where his mind went with it. But yet God was showing him that he would one day be in that leadership position, and then he ended up in it. But he was just in a much different mind state at that time. He had godly compassion, godly wisdom. He loved his brothers. He even got down to the point where he forgave them all. He said, all y'all didn't know what y'all was doing. I still love y'all. Y'all meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And look where we are today. Now I have an opportunity to help y'all. Now I have an opportunity to feed y'all when y'all would have died, basically. So he didn't have the same mentality by the time he started off at 17 having a dream. But by the time he was an adult, he didn't have that same mentality anymore. So he grew both naturally and spiritually. And then they grew as well, because they started feeling guilty over what they did. Of course, they lied to their father, so they had to carry that guilt along with what they actually did to their brother. And then they finally meet him face to face one day, and then he ends up helping them. So that even just shows, that's even another story in and of itself, which is crazy. Because he could have did to them what they did to him, but he didn't. So that just shows growth on both ends. So does anybody have any questions? If nobody has any questions, I will probably bow out gracefully. If nobody has any questions. I know that there's like a delay, so people might have like posted questions or something, but I just can't see them yet. But I'll stay on for like another 2 minutes, and then if I don't see any questions pop up, I'll just leave out. And then if anybody has any questions afterward, you can just comment them still, and then I'll go back and answer them in the comments afterwards. So, but hopefully everybody got something out of it. For anybody who came in a little bit late, or came in and wasn't quite sure what the topic was, I'll just go over what we went over in the outline. So we were talking about God's sovereignty. I started off showing a personal example of how God showed me what sovereignty meant. Went into an official definition of sovereignty. Talked about Logos software, so logos.com, and following Damon Richardson or Urban Logia on YouTube. Damon Richardson on Facebook, Urban Logia on YouTube. That he teaches, or he shows how to use Logos, and he can give you more information about it. But it's a great tool for studying the Bible. And then I went into Old Testament examples for God's sovereignty. We talked about Joseph, we talked about Jonah, and then we went into New Testament examples and talked about Jesus, and then tied it back to us. So that's basically all we talked about today. So if nobody has any questions, then I will probably close out. And God bless. Hopefully everybody has a good night. Hopefully everybody got something out of this. But I'm going to see y'all later. All right. And then next time I'll probably do it again next month at some time. But I'll make an announcement for the next one, how I've been doing all these other times. All right. So I'll talk to y'all later. God bless.